Good morning and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, it's my pleasure to be here. And I'm anxious now to continue our reading of the book, The Papacy and the Civil Power by R.W. Thompson. Yesterday we began our discussion about the universal sovereignty of the popes. And to briefly sum up, the Pope is, as it were, God on earth. And as God on earth, he directs all the kings of the earth. And no king serves but at the Pope's pleasure. And no king does but what the Pope wants him to do. And no king may pass a law that is contrary to the arbitrary laws of the Church, that may change whenever the Pope deems fit. That through these kings, these totally subjected kings, these totally subjugated kings, debased in all their realms, having received what power they have from the Pope himself, must rule the people according to the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church and Roman Catholic canon law. And that if a king should fail in his obligation to obey the Pope, then the Pope has the right to cause the people to rebel against the government, to overthrow it, and to put in its place a government that will serve the Pope. And if all else fails, the Pope can simply take over the country or give it to another kingdom. Regime change. That's the method of enforcement of Roman Catholic canon law in the world. Now, backing up to the beginning of the paragraph that we concluded with yesterday on the program, page 558, if you're following along, near the bottom of the page, it says, this doctrine had continued to grow and strengthen from the time of Pope Gregory VII. The great Hildebrand had excommunicated and deposed Henry IV, Emperor of Germany, and released all his subjects from their allegiance to him. Each of the succeeding pontiffs of the 11th and 12th centuries had avowed it whenever they could safely venture to do so. But it remained for Innocent III, Pope Innocent III, one of the leading and ruling spirits of the age, to make it a part of religious faith by engrafting it by virtue of his infallibility upon the dogmas of the Church. His towering and unsatisfied ambition stimulated him to use it as a means of making himself, quote, the general arbiter of differences and conservator of the peace throughout Christendom, unquote. His proud spirit chafed at the thought that any earthly potentate should equal him, either in greatness or in authority. Therefore, he required that, quote, all disputes between princes should be referred to him, and if either party should refuse, quote, to obey the sentence of Rome, he was to be excommunicated and deposed, unquote, and a like penalty was to be visited upon those who refused to attack whatsoever, quote, refractory delinquent, unquote, he should point out. In other words, he bound kings and peoples to remove these unruly kings. Now he says, here's some of the methods that the popes used: forfeitures, interdicts, excommunications, and every other form of ecclesiastical censure and punishment were of almost daily occurrence. Even such monarchs as Philip Augustus and Henry IV quailed before him, and Peter II of Aragon and John of England, as we have already seen, ignominiously consented to convert their kingdoms into spiritual fiefs and to hold them in subordination to him upon the condition of paying an annual tribute. By virtue of the claim of infallibility, the power of arbitrary papal dispensation was carried to its extremest limit, even to the assertion of exercising of the right to infringe the canons of the Church. That's right. The Pope reserves the right to even violate his own law, the canon law. And I think I contrasted that with Christ, who obeyed every jot and every tittle of his own law. Otherwise, he would not have been a fit sacrifice to redeem man from his sin. The Pope is in clear contradistinction between him against Christ. And that's why we call him here on Inquisition Update, without apology, Antichrist. Now, quote, Innocent III laid down as a maxim that out of the plenitude of his power he might lawfully dispense with the law, unquote. In other words, set aside the law, and caused the Fourth General Lateran Council to insert among its canons one which provided, quote, that the constitutions of princes which are prejudicial to the rights of the Church shall not be observed. And here we have a note by the author from the Ecclesiastical History of Dupin, Volume 11, page 100. Speaking of the Fourth Lateran Council, it says, this is the same council referred to in a former chapter, by one of the canons of which it was provided that heretics should be extirpated, and that whenever, upon proper notice, any prince should fail or refuse to do so, his dominions should be forfeited to the Pope, who should turn them over to someone who would perform that duty. So it is the law of the Church that when the commandment comes forth from the chair of St. Peter in Rome, the biblical and historical Antichrist declares that you shall extirpate the heretics out of your realm. If the prince of the nation to which that directive is given refuses to obey that order, then the Pope has all the power vested in the papacy to remove that prince by whatever means, and to put someone in his place that will, by force, extirpate heretics. And heretics being those who, for whatever reason, do not obey the Pope. That's what a heretic is in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, thus established, this is a fixed principle of the canon law, and consequently, as a part of the religious faith of the Roman Catholic Church. It did not take long to carry this doctrine of dispensation to the extent of applying it to the observance of oaths, and to find in the decretals this provision, quote, that an oath disadvantageous to the Church is not binding, and that one extorted by force was of slight obligation and might be annulled by ecclesiastical authority. So the Pope can absolve you of any oath, and of course we've already seen in our discussion about the kings of England how they were put under pressure by the people to observe Magna Carta and give the people basic rights. The Pope simply absolved the king of any oath that he took to the people to give them rights. Okay, the Pope is the ruler of all men, and therefore there are no rights inherent to the people. And the papacy fulminated at the Magna Carta as a violation of the Pope's rights. Okay, the people have no rights under papal rule. Now, instances are numerous to show the effect of these teachings upon the lives and conduct of the popes. And Mr. Hallam gives two memorable ones by way of illustration. That of Urban VI, who promulgated a solemn and general declaration against keeping faith with heretics. Okay, it is a violation of Roman Catholic canon law out of the decree of this particular Pope, Urban VI, to keep faith or to keep company with heretics. And that of Eugenius IV, Pope Eugenius IV, who, acting upon this principle, annulled compacts with the Hussites by releasing those who had sworn to them, and made the king of Hungary break his treaty with Amurath II, absolving him from his promise, quote, on the express ground that a treaty disadvantageous to the church ought not to be kept, unquote. Now remember, the Hussites were regarded as heretics. And since it is a law of the church that you may not maintain faith with the heretics, any oath, any contract, any agreement that you make with the Hussites is automatically null and void, because they're heretics. The law doesn't provide that you can keep faith with heretics. You can't bind yourself to any agreements with a heretic. And so the Pope absolved the king from any protection of these Hussites and rose a crusade against the Hussites to completely obliterate them from off the planet. Now, we've already discussed that God, in his providence, enabled the Hussites to drive away the Crusaders. And 2 or 3 attempts, serious attempts, were made to extirpate and annihilate the Hussites. And Bohemia was saved. And out of this you must realize that this Pope, who considered himself the replacement of the Son of God on earth, divinity in the flesh, how much it humiliated him to see his papal armies, his crusaders, his extirpators of heretics sent home in disgrace, and tried to avenge his name by launching another crusade against the Hussites. And I made the inference yesterday. I wonder, at Bohemian Grove, that sinful, idolatrous mass, Roman Catholic mass, and mock cremation of a human caricature is the papacy's occult method of expressing his continual frustration over the repeated defeat of his armies against the Hussites of Bohemia. Is that what Bohemian Grove is all about? I only ask the question rhetorically. Eventually we'll know the truth, because God is going to reveal it to us. But I pose the question to my listeners. What is Bohemian Grove all about? Is it directly connected to the Pope's defeats against the Hussites? Now, continuing with the reading, it says, these instances are dwarfed before the more flagrant exercise of the same power by Innocent III in the advancement of his schemes of temporal policy. At the very beginning of his pontificate, he required the Roman prefect to take an oath of allegiance to himself, when it was his duty to take it to the emperor, from the obligation of which duty he released him. He asserted the right to punish offenses against the civil law and, quote, to interpose with his judgment and annul the decisions of the civil tribunal, unquote. He reminded the inhabitants of the Tuscan states who owed allegiance to the emperor, quote, that there were 2 great lights in the social heaven, having their seat in Italy, the lesser of which, the imperial authority, received its light from the greater, the papal see, unquote. Thus, reiterating what the Pope teaches, all power is vested in the breast of the Pope. No king has power but what power he has been granted by the Pope, and having received that power from the Pope can take it away. Now, he fulminated also against Otho, Emperor of Germany, a bull of excommunication, released his subjects from their allegiance to him, and stirred up a rebellion against him and in favor of Frederick, the youthful son of Henry VI. As we have seen at another place, he released King John from his oath that he had taken before the barons at Runnymede to observe and enforce the salutary provisions of Magna Carta, and concentrating, as it were, all his enormous claim of power in a single expressive thought, he profoundly announced the maxim that, quote, the Pope, in virtue of the plenitude of his power, might dispense even with rights, unquote. So by releasing King John of his oath to uphold Magna Carta, the papacy claimed the power to dispense even with the rights of the people. The Pope can, at a word, take away all your rights. And if that happened in the United States of America, the government would be bound, according to its sovereign oath to the Pope, to obey his decrees, would simply wipe away all of our rights out of the Constitution. And that is exactly what is happening in this country with the suspension of posse comitatus, well, the Patriot Act and the NDAA. All these new laws that have been promulgated since 9/11 have stripped the American people of the rights which originated from the Magna Carta. So what we're seeing in this country today, if seen from the light of history, the history that we're talking about in this book, then he can clearly understand the Pope's hand in everything that's happened in this country since 9/11. The destruction of our rights, the basic inalienable rights claimed through the Magna Carta and through our own Constitution, have simply been wiped away. Without consulting the people are subjugated and simply must go along with the law. Now it says, the very nature of the oath enacted by Innocent III of King John shows the inordinate ambition of the one and the pusillanimity of the other. Lingard says, quote, he swore that he would be faithful to God, to the blessed Peter, to the Roman Church, to Pope Innocent, and to Innocent's rightful successors, unquote. This oath was extorted by the papal interdict, which closed all the churches in England and left the dead to go unburied, and by the terrible thunder of excommunication. It placed the English king at the feet of the Pope, and the entire destiny of the English people in his hands, to be disposed of, not as their wants and interests demanded, but as the wants and interests of the papacy and the welfare of the Roman Catholic Church required it. What wonder, then, that at the very beginning of the Protestant Reformation in England, an earnest protest was made against this absorption by the Pope of all civil power of government, and this plotting to destroy the last vestige of popular authority. This protest might have been heard in the mutterings of discontent among the body of the people, but it was unavailing, except as the measures already narrated grew gradually out of it. John Wycliffe, the morning star of the Reformation, 100 years after the papal conquest of England, and 200 years before Martin Luther, maintained, in the face of all the powerful and persecuting prelates in the kingdom, that the nation had forfeited her dearest rights by so long consenting that the crown should be held as a fief to the Holy See, and that the king should properly and rightfully administer the government, even though at the same time he refused any tribute to the Pope of Rome. Putting out the life and example of Christ, who was, quote, unwilling to become a ruler in civil matters, unquote, and did not teach his disciples to seek after civil dominion, he declared, quote, Therefore, it behooves us to require that the Pope should be observant of his religious obligations after this pattern. It is clear, he said, that we are bound to resist him. We are bound to resist the Pope in the exaction of a condition which cannot be proper to him as being purely civil, unquote. So you can see what got Wycliffe in trouble. He declared that the temporal power of the Pope was null and void, and that he should keep his nose into his spiritual affairs and stay out of the civil affairs of government. He should follow the example of Christ. He should follow the example of Christ. But he doesn't follow the example of Christ. Therefore, he is Antichrist. Now, wherein does the difference consist between the claim of papal power and prerogatives in the time of Wycliffe and the present? The infallibility of the Pope means now just what it did then. With whatsoever has been done and said by all the popes and in all the centuries since superadded, as the means of overcoming the increased power of resistance among the people of the advancing and progressive nations, in other words, the Protestant nations. The doctrine runs back to the remotest times so as to include every assertion of pontifical power made by any of the popes from the beginning and concentrates it all in the present. Now, what he's talking about here is the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and everything that's been piled on top of these forgeries ever since. We're talking specifically about the Roman Catholic canon law, which is just a compilation of all the false decrees of the papacy from the very beginning of the church. Okay? It says the doctrine runs back to the remotest times so as to include every assertion of pontifical power made by any of the popes from the beginning and concentrates it all in the present. If any single pope, by virtue of the, quote, primacy of St. Peter, unquote, struck nations out of existence, dethroned monarchs, released subjects from their oaths of allegiance, appointed rulers for the people without their consent, extirpated heretics by fire and sword, dispensed the obligation of the most solemn oaths on the part of others, and violated their own, then may be present or any future pope, then may the present or any future pope do any or all of these things infallibly, whensoever it shall seem to him that the interests of the church require it. Do you see how all-encompassing the power of the papacy, the pretended powers of the papacy, are extended? There's no law on earth that can control him. There's no law in heaven that can control him. And again, there's no other institution on the planet that's even a candidate for Antichrist if the Pope is a candidate for Antichrist. We have our Antichrist. No need to look in the future for one. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial, the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a Left Behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you would wish to comment, ask questions, or criticize, whatever, you may email me at tom@seawaves.us. That's tom@seawaves.us. And also check out the website, inquisitionupdate.org. Now, continuing where we left off before the break, R.W. Thompson points out, there is no word in any language more comprehensive than the word infallible. It embraces everything in the past, the present, and the future. Even while its earthly possessor remains in the world, it elevates him above the world and makes him a co-partner with God in the exercise of divine power. And at this point, I refer my listeners again to Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14, and see if what I assert is true, that the papacy is the human agency through which Lucifer attempts to fulfill his five-pointed false prophecy located there. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. How is it that Lucifer intends to exalt his throne above the stars of God, to sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, and to be like the Most High, to ascend above the heights of the clouds, to be like God? How is Satan bringing forth, or attempting to bring forth, the fulfillment of that prophecy? I assert to my listeners without equivocation, it is through the papacy. The papacy and the successors of the popes are the human agency through which Satan deceives the world and asserts himself to the place of God Almighty on the earth. An earthly kingdom, not a heavenly one. An earthly kingdom bent on earthly increase. And it is a counterfeit kingdom. Counterfeit of the true. counterfeit of the kingdom of Christ. Therefore, it is the kingdom of Antichrist. Now, keeping these things in mind, we should be the better enabled to apply the doctrines of the papacy to the condition of things in our own country, and to understand what the present Pope Pius IX expects and requires of those citizens who recognize him as a, quote, domestic prince, unquote, within the territorial limits of the United States. Now, R.W. Thompson is going to show us, at the time of the writing of this book, 1876, during the reign of Antichrist Pope Pius IX, what effect this infallibility has within the confines of the United States of America. Now, he says we have nothing to do now with the question of how far or how many of these citizens will render obedience to any demands he shall make. It is but just to assume that multitudes of them will not, when they may be pressed to the extremity of impairing any of the fundamental principles of the government. But we have directly and immediately to do with the papal doctrines he is now so assiduously laboring to reestablish, so that we may be fully fully comprehend them in all their length and breadth, and understand wherein, if successfully established, they will assail the integrity of our institutions. The people of the United States, appreciating the advantages and distinctive features of their government, have wisely and unselfishly provided a mode by which those born in other countries may enjoy, to a like extent with themselves, all these advantages. They have provided by their naturalization laws that an alien may become a citizen, and in return for this valuable privilege have required of him only that he shall take an oath of allegiance to the government, whereby he shall swear that he, quote, doth absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to every foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty whatever, unquote. Okay, that's the oath that every naturalized citizen of the United States takes. He swears to abjure every foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty whatsoever. So that means that every Roman Catholic that comes into this country has taken an oath to swear off his allegiance to the Pope. But is that what happens? That's the question we're dealing with here. Now, it says, such an invitation to citizenship in a free government, extended to those who have felt the burden and pressure of absolutism, commends itself to the admiration of mankind. It stamped our government from the beginning with a degree of liberality hitherto unknown among the nations. The oaths of allegiance are sometimes taken by those who regard them as mere form, and as having no binding obligation upon their consciences, is unquestionably true. There are very few who have not realized the truth of this in their own experience and observation, but it is equally true that a large majority of those who become naturalized citizens in the United States become so with a full and proper appreciation of the binding nature of the allegiance they assume, and with the determination to discharge faithfully and honestly all the obligations which attach to their new relations. Innumerable considerations combine thus to influence them apart from the mere integrity of personal motive and conduct. Chief among these is the fact that by coming here, they have sought to escape the consequences of monarchical rule and to better their condition by enjoying the protection of civil institutions which recognize the people and not a monarch as the authors of the law, and where they, by also becoming lawmakers, may increase the sense of their own personal dignity and importance in society, and thus elevate themselves and their posterity. It is altogether natural that after obtaining privileges of so much personal and social importance, they should be unwilling to forfeit or lose them by any act of their own. But while this is readily and cheerfully conceded to the bulk of our naturalized citizens, the fact cannot and should not be disguised that there are some among them whose minds are impressed or liable to be impressed with the belief that although they have improved their condition by coming to this country, it may be yet further improved by the establishment of an independent ecclesiastical hierarchy with authority to subordinate the government to such laws and regulations as they, under the direction and dictation of the Pope, shall consider necessary to bring the people under subjection to the Roman Catholic Church. So what do you suppose R.W. Thompson's going to tell us now? There are people coming into this country, even at this time, and still today, that swear their oath of allegiance to this country but hold secret oaths to the Pope. And those oaths nullify their oath of allegiance to this country. We're talking about obedience to the Pope versus obedience to the civil governments of this country. Now it says their liability to this impression is a result of their education, which is called religious, because it is received alone from priests acting as officers of the church. What we're talking about is two things. The teachings of canon law in the Roman Catholic Church run diametrically opposed to our Constitution and form of government. Every Roman Catholic is taught in the churches that his first allegiance is to the Pope, that he is the vicar of Christ on earth, and that the divine law is his law, and it must be obeyed above every civil law. Okay, the second thing is the parochial schools, that this education received in the churches even goes into the schools that the Roman Catholics attend. So they're well inculcated with the belief that at some time in American history, that if they are truly good Catholics, they have to amend this error. They have to repair the breach between the United States and the Papacy. And what lies in the breach is the Constitution of the United States, that it has to be destroyed, and that the Pope becomes the single arbiter of truth and law in this country. As vicar of Christ, he has that divine prerogative, and it is incumbent upon every member of the Roman Catholic Church to use whatever power at his disposal, whatever office that he holds in this country, to work toward that end. Okay. One of the first principles taught them is the belief that as the laws of God are higher than the laws of man, and the eternal welfare of their souls of more importance than all secular and temporal things, therefore the state, that is, the government of the United States, must obey the church, that is, the Roman Catholic Church, or rather the Pope, and not be permitted to enact or enforce any law which the Roman Catholic Church or the Pope, as its infallible head, shall consider inconsistent with the divine law, the faith of the church, or good morals. And in a word, we're talking about no law may be passed that is inconsistent with Roman Catholic canon law and tradition. So that puts our entire Constitution in jeopardy of dismissal or reinterpretation to make it consistent with Roman Catholic canon law. Trust me when I tell you there's much in the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States that have been directly, specifically, and repeatedly condemned by the popes of Rome, including the current pope at the time of the writing of this book, Pope Pius IX, as sins against God. So where does that put every Roman Catholic in this country? It puts them in a position of having to redeem this country and to place it on a silver platter and hand it to the Pope. Now, under the influence of this teaching, it is difficult for them to realize the wisdom and virtues exhibited by our fathers in resorting to revolution to throw off the authority of the British Crown and substituting for it the authority of the people. They have a sort of undefined idea that the people should be permitted to make the laws by which they are to be governed. And this idea, which arises naturally in all minds, might be developed into positive belief in theirs, and probably would be, if it were not that the faith and teachings of their church, the Roman Catholic Church, as interpreted and explained to them by their priests, forbid it. For fear that they may be influenced by it, they are held under the strictest surveillance by their priests, who employ every opportunity to remind them that they owe higher allegiance and duty to the Roman Catholic Church than to the United States government, and must obey the Pope at every and any cost, even though, by doing so, all human governments and laws should be destroyed. Okay, ultimately, that's the goal, to destroy all civil governments and to put them beneath the Pope's jurisdiction. And that's what we've been reading about since the beginning of this book, how the Pope was conquering the nations through the kings that he set in place to rule over the people, and that how he extended his papal jurisdiction even beyond the confines of the so-called donation of Constantine, old Europe, and even took control in Ireland. Now it says they are required to believe that this obedience to the Pope is obedience to God, because God has placed the Pope above all human governments and laws, with power as his only infallible representative on earth, to require and command obedience to all his decrees upon matters of faith and morals. And the utmost precaution is observed by the papal hierarchy to exclude such impressions as would naturally arise in the minds from the contemplation and enjoyment of our liberal institutions, and especially from their participation in the management of public affairs. In this, their vigilance is extreme, and exhibits itself most strikingly in prohibiting them from permitting their children to mingle with ours in our common schools, because they are provided by the state, and because, in order that they may comprehend and understand the structure of the government, the pupils are taught that the people are the primary source of all our laws, and not the Pope or the Church, and that every citizen of the United States is bound to pay obedience to them, the Pope, the Church, and all the kings and princes of the earth, to the contrary notwithstanding. So now you know what the purpose of all the parochial schools was about, to teach Roman Catholics that the government of the United States is topsy-turvy, that the people are not to govern, but they are to be governed. First, the king is to be governed. The president of the United States is to be governed by the Pope. And that through the president of the United States, the Pope governs the people. We have our government topsy-turvy. The people are the governors, and they select representatives to represent themselves in government, and that the government passes laws under which the people have agreed to live. This is contrary to the hierarchical structure of the papacy. We are a bottom-up form of government. They are a top-down form of government. They are totally incompatible. The Pope has declared it so and has bound his Roman Catholics on pain of excommunication by whatever means necessary, without jeopardizing the Church, to change the form of government in this country to make it conform to the hierarchical top-down structure enjoyed by the papacy throughout history. Now, few things are so wonderful as the readiness with which many of the Roman Catholic part of our population, especially among those who are naturalized, accept these teachings and act upon them, while at the same time they are unwilling to admit and are too ignorant to realize their inevitable tendency. which is that they are training and educating their children in the belief that our government is altogether wrong in separating church and state, that our fathers were wrong in resorting to revolution to get rid of the monarchy, that it is wrong for the people to make their own laws, and that the only form of government upon which the blessing of God can rest is that wherein the Roman Catholic Church shall govern the state and the Pope the Church. They fail to see that by these means they are aiding in the erection of a state within a state. This is the fifth column that I'm talking about. This is what R.W. Thompson has been trying to tell us all along, that we have a nation and a totally incompatible nation that has grown up in this country right before our very eyes with a dedication to overthrow and to take over this country. He says they fail to see that by these means they are aiding in the erection of a state within a state, whose authority will be sufficient, if its exercise be permitted, to regulate the government and society by its laws, and to compel obedience to them by force, whenever it shall become necessary to resort to it. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that day has arrived. We're going to see the government of the United States use lethal force to make this country Catholic. R.W. Thompson warned about it. We can see the evidence of it right before our very eyes with the Patriot Act and NDAA and every other of the new laws that have passed since 9/11. They've used 9/11 to launch a crusade against the heretics in the Middle East, and at the same time they've begun an all-out war within this country to overtake and to overthrow our form of government and to make it Catholic. That's exactly what's happening, and I implore all my listeners to look at the changes that have been made in the United States, compare them with Roman Catholic canon law, and ask them, who is our government loyal to? Are they loyal to the people or to someone else? And if someone else, who is that someone else? And R.W. Thompson is telling us and has been telling us. Make no mistake about it. There's no room for equivocation now. Rome has asserted itself supreme over this country and our Constitution and our people. Our government is imposing Roman Catholic canon law. It is conforming to the New World Order as dictated through the encyclicals of the popes of Rome. And I highly recommend another book. If you can get a copy of it, get Ecclesiastical Megalomania, The Economic and Political Thought of the Roman Catholic Church by Dr. John W. Robbins. And he will show you precisely the papal encyclicals that were written, what they mean, and how they are being implemented not only in this country but around the world. There is indeed a new world order coming about in this world. And it's not new at all. And my listeners should recognize it immediately for what it is. It is simply the restoration of the old world order about which we have been speaking for the last 4 years on Inquisition Update. There's no room for error. It's the truth. And God's people have an obligation to themselves, to their families, to their perpetuity, and to Christ, to identify it as Antichrist, to declaim it in the world, and make our allegiance with Christ. Our country has betrayed us. Rather, the Pope, having taken over the country, has betrayed us. And we have betrayed Christ by allowing the ecumenical movement to continue unquestioned in this country. Vatican Council II should be renounced tomorrow by every Bible-believing Christian in this country. And we should demand our God-given rights. Magna Carta, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights. And barring that, we have no other option but to take up arms. No other option. Or simply be steamrolled and run through the guillotines and fed to lions and beheaded and burned at the stake. But I'll tell you what, if that's what it takes, that's what I intend to live out. That I will never bend my knee to a papal dictatorship in this country. These immigrants, they fail also to see that this state of things cannot exist so long as our form of government shall stand, our Protestant form of government shall stand, and that those who require them to aid in producing it would not hesitate to sacrifice the government itself if by that means they could establish their hierarchical system, their papal, antichrist hierarchical system. And since such is the position in which many of our Roman Catholic populations stand, it is in every possible sense important that the country should realize to what point their present subserviency to the papacy, the papal hierarchy, may possibly lead them, unless something be done to counteract its influence. In order to do this intelligently, it is necessary to understand how far their oath of allegiance is considered by the Roman Catholic hierarchy as standing in the way of their complete obedience and submission to the Pope, whenever he shall consider that the interests of the Roman Catholic Church require any change in our plan of government or disobedience to any of our laws. The obligation of an oath is understood to arise out of the law authorizing it. Although it binds the conscience in a moral sense, in whatever form it may be taken, yet if not taken pursuant to law, its violation does not amount to perjury. And now, tomorrow on the program, we're going to talk about the oath that we take and how they are viewed by the papacy, and we're going to continue to expose the lawlessness of the lawless one and the lawless church next time on Inquisition Update. We'll see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.